Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining today's office hours session. Many of you know me, but I'm Jackson Gaspari, Director of Member Services, and we have Henry Herndon, our AGM, online. Nick Gosling, per usual, is managing tech in the background for this session. We do not have any one specific topic or presentation teed up for this one. It's really a chance for you all to ask questions and for us to do our best to answer those questions. But before we get into it, I would like to remind folks that we did host the last office hours session on December 19th on the topic of the rates, utility proceedings, insights into different market conditions, and there was some really strong Q&A that followed that presentation by Henry. So I encourage you to check out that one if you missed it. That's available on our office hours webpage where we post all of the recordings from these sessions after they're complete. But with that, I'll turn it over to Henry to maybe lead in with a couple topics, and then we'll open it up from there.
Yeah, thanks, Jackson, and thanks everybody for joining. I'll just maybe do a couple brief announcements based on yesterday's board meeting before we really just open this up to an open conversation and see what the group would like to discuss. Um, but first off, the board did adopt a date for our 2026 annual board and membership meetings that will be April 30th this year. So hopefully folks will get that into their calendars. Agenda wise, that would include, you know, elections of the board, appointments to committees, elections of officers, things of that nature, regular annual meeting business. We'll also have a presentation from the Energy Authority, who is an independent third party we have contracted with to conduct an independent evaluation of risk management policy and practice. So they'll be presenting their findings, and I think that'll be some good content for folks to attend and learn from. And then, yeah, other maybe just sort of readouts from the board meeting in case folks weren't there. There was good discussion and then action by the board to move forward with the process proposed by the hiring committee. I think we're looking at an executive director start as soon as March of this year, and the board agreed to bring that role online and then delegate authority to that position to hire the director of power operations as a sort of standard process for having an executive with hiring authority for the other staff roles. And then um, the board also adopted the proposed recommendations on bill positions from the Regulatory and Legislative Affairs Committee, which we could recount some of that if of interest to the group. But really, this is a forum for you all to chime in with your questions or comments or topics of interest, and happy to discuss any of those with you. So, yeah, happy to open the floor for discussion.
See a hand from Joe. Go ahead, Joe.
Okay. So I'll give you some feedback on what's happening in Newmarket as far as the rates go. So we have announced on our town website and on our town newsletter and on Facebook, the rate increase. And by and large, other than one person, I think that said that they were going to switch. By and large, most of the people are saying, that they'll continue to support community power, which is good. I was just curious as to what you guys are hearing.
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in on that a bit. Um, so I'd say it's still fairly early since we announced rates, and we've seen a number of communities be pretty proactive in sharing that information, which is great. Um, with any rate announcement that we have as an organization, we typically see a spike in customer activity directly following that information being shared. And so we have noticed through report outs of our call center that there has been sort of this jump in customer activity. Typically that settles in, during the rate period, and then we'll ramp up again one way or another in the next period. So despite our higher rates, we still get reports of opt-ups and opt-ins on a weekly basis. So people are still moving into community power and taking advantage of those higher renewable options, which is a good indicator there. Um, but the member services team will, continue to engage with our member communities. We have a pretty full slate of meetings booked for next week. So if there are any opportunities where you would like to lean on us for support, we're happy to participate. I'll also maybe just draw folks' attention to that, we had the rate announcement go out, but immediately following that, there was a message from myself to member reps and alternates containing some additional supporting materials that included a document speaking to community power benefits and values as a reminder, as well as a second page that's really focused on CPCNH increasing its competitiveness for New Hampshire by being a participant in the electric market, and had like 7 points related to that on things we're doing now and things that we could do in the future to increase competition. So I'd encourage people to check that out if you haven't seen it. And then there was also a link to the office hours we mentioned earlier as part of that follow-up.
I'll just add that in the newsletter and stuff that we did put out with the rate increase, we did include a number of your comments from that note. What the value that community power gives to the community. So it was very helpful to have that.
That's great to hear, Joe. Thanks for that feedback.
I guess I'll ask another question. So, you want to talk a little bit about um, the hire committee, what their timeframes might be?
Yeah, I can try to recount that from the materials and from the report yesterday. Um, let's see. So they've gone through, paper screening, a round one meeting with candidates for both executive director and director of power operations candidates. They completed that as of December 23rd, in process of scheduling and preparing for in-person round two meetings, and that will occur in January. And they've confirmed round two teams who will meet with executive director candidates. Those teams include board directors, member reps, and staff members. And in terms of the sequence, the board agreed with the hiring committee's recommendation to make the executive director hire first with a target start date of Q1, and a finalist to be identified at the February meeting, and possibly contingent on special meeting as needed. And then once the executive director is in place, there's all this work that has been done, all this vetting of candidates to be available to that hire to then presumably move quickly in filling the director of power operations position. Um, yeah, as I think that's a summary to start. I'm not sure if folks have other things that I might have missed.
No, I think that the key thing is to look into hopefully have things resolved by the end of the first quarter here, right?
Yeah, and then there still is, a hiring process for a finance director that
Right.
we anticipate would happen shortly thereafter as well.
Right.
Not to monopolize everything here, but some of the people might be interested in. I was on the board meeting yesterday, but maybe you could give an update on CPCNH's financial status.
Sure. Yeah, I could do that. So, I mean, at present, CPCNH is in a period of sort of uh, a moment of positive cash position, and then going into the remainder of these winter months is gonna, require some financing for our cash flow needs. As we wait for the rates that were just adopted to go into effect. The rates that were adopted and that are going into effect have the reserve adder to retire financing obligations in calendar year 2026. So the effect of those, the driver behind those is to solve a cash flow challenge with CPCNH, and the byproduct of that is recouping significant reserves over the next 6 months, and then pending on rate setting for the next period throughout the remainder of the year. Um, so the trajectory and the plan are firm and on track. We're looking at, this rate period recouping significant reserves. There's always the 2+ month delay in revenues hitting accounts from when they are accrued. So moving into the fall period, we'll really see all of the results of that. And, CBCNH is on track for a firm financial foundation come, let's say, Q4 of this year and moving into 2027. So again, there'll be a period of, requiring financing moving through Q1 and 2, and then the trajectory towards a firm financial foundation later in the year and heading into 2027. Does that answer your question, Joe?
He's muted.
So yeah, sorry about that. I hit the wrong button there. Yeah. Again, I support you in community power, and keep our fingers crossed that all the forecasting and stuff that we're doing is accurate or close there.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just elaborate a little bit more. There was one perhaps there were several perhaps conservative assumptions, but one particular assumption that went into the rates was, based on how many customers we anticipate refresh enrolling. And that was a conservative assumption. And with the newest information, we're expecting slightly larger customer refresh enrollment, which would have a positive impact to our financial position moving through the period. Again, we're going to be tracking forecasts very closely. That's really the priority moving into this year, is really tightening up financial tracking and reporting and some of the key performance indicators and standardizing all of that, among a couple of other priorities. But yeah, we'll be monitoring tracking those forecasts to actuals very, very closely.
Well, it's the questions that I have, really financial and how we're doing.
I guess I'll ask some questions. This is Ken Trown from Hopkinton. Taking a very pessimistic viewpoint, have you heard or gotten in the field that are any towns may pull out of the coalition because of the rate increases, rates?
I think it's a fair question, Ken. It's something that certainly Member Services is the most engaged on for CPCNH. As of now, no. Like I mentioned earlier, it's still early in the process, but we'll be working with communities to provide all the support we can. Ultimately, there is the local decision framework there, but we're hopeful that communities continue to see the long-term value for their customers and their communities by participating and really leaning into the customer choice element, that if any individual customer feels that the rates do not work for them at this time, it's very easy for them to leave, and then we hope that they'll come back in the future. So, we'll continue to obviously keep folks informed as things develop, but yeah, at this point, we have not heard affirmatively of any plans to withdraw.
Okay, that's good. And I'll be seeing you on Thursday.
Yes, you will. And I will be well prepared to answer any questions you may have and work through the topic with you all. One other item of note, just because it was top of mind for me, is we saw a lot of success with subscribing the Poverty Plains solar project. We have 11 communities in Eversource that will be financially benefiting from that. The amount of financial benefit does depend on the default supply rate, but we're looking at a cent plus in group net metering credit. So that's reducing either municipal bills or allowing those communities to have a funding source. for other types of energy projects through our annual solicitation process that Mark leads as our Director of Projects and Programs. We have selected Garland Pit as another opportunity for an Eversource group net metering project. So it's going to be similarly structured to Poverty Plains, and we're going to be looking at opportunities for subscribing that. It's also a gravel pit project. This one's located in Conway, New Hampshire, and it's a single axis tracking system. So it actually has a little bit more output than Poverty Plains will. But yeah, seeking interest on more group net metering subscriptions. They have to be governmental accounts, but school districts qualify, so they don't have to be municipal buildings. They can be school district buildings. And just wanted to put that out there that member services would be happy to meet with anyone to discuss that project and opportunities that are presented there. One other element of both projects is it provides a really good opportunity for the coalition to secure renewable energy certificates at below market value, which helps increase our cost competitiveness when it comes to our renewable portfolio standard compliance or opt-up product servicing. So, um, some good examples of, with Poverty Plains, we have steel in the ground, another great opportunity for a large solar array to benefit our members. And, we hope to make more progress with other small scale or innovative types of local development.
Would it be fair to say that without the coalition, Poverty Plains would not exist as a
It's quite
solar array?
possible. I think it would have been incredibly challenging for Encore to subscribe that project and come to a good financial agreement that works for all parties without CPCNH. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think that is a huge benefit of us. We are bringing together energy leaders like you all together from around the state and are making things happen collectively.
Yeah, yeah. I think in Hopkinton, that's one of the selling points that we're going to have is
So
I
it
can,
is.
can point to where it's right next door to us.
Yep. And in Hopkinton as well, you have your school district is selling us thermal RECs from your wood chip boilers. So that's another cool arrangement that we have with you all as a REC aggregator.
Okay, great. I was not aware of that
Well, we're on it, and
one.
yeah, that's glad we're talking about it now. So Joe, I see you have a hand back up.
Yeah, I'll just add that next Thursday, Mark Wallinger is given the Newmarket Energy Committee a primer on what group net metering is. Talk about potential opportunities for Newmarket to participate in 2006 or toward the end of 2026.
Yeah, I'm glad the Mark is going to be there, Joe. I'm sorry I can't make it myself because I'll be with Ken in Hopkinton, and we'll have Andrew in Plainfield. So busy night for folks at CPCNH.
I see Paul Deshane's comment in the chat. Can you elaborate on the status of revolving line of credit? I read the report, but would like more detail of the likelihood of attaining it in 2027. Yeah, so in discussions with our partners, financial institutions, River City Bank, our credit application has been delayed. This is an application to diversify our credit support beyond its current status. And we got some really good, productive feedback from the bank in those discussions. There are a couple main factors. One of the pieces of their consideration is a material difference in New Hampshire state law compared to California, where they provide financing support for many similar community power agencies. And in those instances, the municipal members of the Joint Powers Agency provide collateral backstopping or financing for the loan. This is prohibited under New Hampshire law. Under New Hampshire law, the city and town members cannot use general funds to pay for operating or capital costs of community power. They can only fund these programs through the rate. So that's one difference that affects the lender's assessment. And there are sort of other ways they could then mitigate their risk by perhaps being a secured party to our lockbox along with other suppliers. So that's just a nuance or perhaps an added um, threshold for the lending. And then, there's all the sort of basic metrics and requirements. Really, what the bank would like to see is CPCNH maintaining accrued reserves outside of our lockbox account for prolonged periods of time and meeting other metrics such as budgets tracking or actuals tracking, forecast tracking to budget more accurately. And there's been a lot of positive discussion about some of the improvements that have occurred, but the fairly limited amount of time since certain management or operational changes, the bank would just like to see a longer track record for that. So there's agreement to continue the discussion. We're going to reconvene in quarter 2 and check back in, but really looking towards once CPCNH has accrued and maintained sufficient reserves outside of the lockbox, that being a key metric. And that's why we're sort of starting to look towards 2027 as a good timeline after which that will be achieved. We're looking at retiring the financing late 2026 and then being able to maintain those balances thereafter. So I think that CPCNH is very well on track to being in a great position to diversifying credit in 2027 or early in 2027. And we have a good understanding and a good developing relationship towards that. So I think that timeline is reasonable and achievable. Yeah, Councilor Tabor.
Um, Hi, Henry, and hi, Jackson, and everybody. Just to follow up on that, what's the ultimate target for reserves that we're trying to achieve? And how long do you think that'll take to get there? Remember, we started out at 120 days, but could you give us a little color on that?
Yeah, so the targets remain the same targets. The timelines have been changed. So we still have a minimum target of 60 days of cash and then an actual target of 120 days. And the policy was updated to adjust those targets to be achieved, the minimum target in 2028, and so the 60-day target in 2028 and the 120-day target in 2030. So we have a bit of a runway. Couple of years. And there is perhaps a front loading of the building up towards those reserves this year that is, again, more driven by a cash flow or liquidity need, the byproduct of which is having the reserves on hand. And then I think the policy discussion at the board level at the next rate setting period, or perhaps at the rate setting period going into 2027, really becomes how steep do we want the slope of the reserve growth to be. So right now we have a fairly steep reserve growth. We have a 2-cent adder in the rate to build reserves, really to bring in the cash flow, bring in the account balances to meet cash flow requirements. And then I think there becomes a very legitimate policy discussion once we have some minimum threshold. How quickly do we want to make sure we're hitting that 60-day target in, do we want to hit at the beginning of 2028, at the end of 2028, in advance? How do we sort of calibrate now that we're sort of tracking and demonstrating our financial performance? I think that'll be a key focus of the board, if that makes sense.
And in terms of amounts, correct me if I'm wrong, Henry, I believe 60A is 30 million and 120 is 60 million. Of course, that's dependent on our current customer base. So
Right.
it does scale with the amount of load customers.
And this sort of feeds the other major focus and discussion right now, which is, how do we get a couple of cents, 1, 2, 3 cents out of the rate relative to other providers? And this is one of those, 2 cents being the reserve. And, once certain thresholds are met or the minimum target is met, that could be alleviated, that could be lowered. The rate of reserve growth could be lowered. Or once we're at, the operating target, perhaps excluded, or perhaps there are credits back if we've over collected in reserve. And then by having the reserves, that opens up a lot of the other opportunities for rate relief, less interest expense. There's the other steps on that pathway of registering in the wholesale market, eliminating some of our service fees,
Right. Load serving entity. Yeah.
Load serving entity, that's right. Um, and then really it's about portfolio strategy. So if we don't have reserves, we don't have any risk appetite or risk tolerance, and we're limited in, we have to hedge all the way and we have more risk premiums. So looking at how could we, by having reserves, have a more flexible or a better portfolio strategy to get lower cost energy, or just have a better strategy in terms of how and when are we buying power. That can lower the energy side or the portfolio side of the rate as well. So these are all things that are front of mind in the staff, and I think some of the hiring decisions are going to support that as well, and they're the focus going into this year.
Okay. And that was a question one of our energy committee members had, was looking at the chart of your rate build. We saw the 2 cents for um, digging out of the hole, so to speak, but it looked like in the energy purchasing side, we still were a little higher for the energy purchase than the Eversource 11.3 cents. So I assume that was because of the hedging.
Yeah, but in part, yes. So some of the hedges we placed this past year and then going into this rate period, we did not place at the most opportune time of the market. And then there's just the difference in method again, with the utilities having 50% of their residential rate on the spot market and marked to those real-time prices as opposed to locked into forward contracts. So yeah, it is both a market timing issue for 2025 and the differences in methods or exposure between CPCNH and the utilities. And I know we've talked around this a little bit, but there has been an indication from the PUC that there's going to be some adjustments to some of the utilities rates. That might be a larger adjustment in the case of Liberty Utilities. It might be a smaller adjustment in the case of Eversource, but some upward adjustments for their rates to account for some of the costs that aren't all represented in there. So that's just another factor.
Yeah, no, that's a very relevant factor, I think. Um, when do you think those adjustments might be made, and how are you doing um, on the public affairs side with the effort to get the utilities to reconcile within 6 months?
So that was a success. So the Public Utility Commission did rule in favor of CPCNH in setting the precedent that these reconciliations will be made in 6-month intervals and not pushed further out into the future. So that was, I think, a direct result of CPCNH's work in that arena, the work Gina and Clifton and others are doing there. So that's positive. And then I don't have a specific date, and I think the latest expectations are that some of these reconciliations, based on that 6-month ruling, are, if they're not seen in a mid-month or a mid-cycle change for this upcoming period, then we could expect some form of reconciliations in going into the next rate period.
Right, right. Because I think Eversource has a mismatch of rate versus purchasing of about $4 million.
Well, that 4 million is, I believe, primarily due to errors in Eversource's business systems.
Yeah.
I'm not certain of the if they have quantified the under collections from the spot market exposure. Um, I have not seen firm numbers on those
Okay.
on that side of things. And so yeah, I wouldn't, again, with a small utility with a very small load like Liberty, it could be a cent or a couple of cents of impact. Eversource, I don't know that we'd see that level of magnitude. It might be less than a cent of impact, although there is this outstanding question of, are their rates underpricing the spot market? And if so, to what degree? And how will that reconciliation play out?
Yeah. Well, that's why it's so good that we're getting a 6 months reconciliation, because otherwise, it's a competitive market and the market signals aren't clear
Right.
without the reconciliation.
Right. And on this note, I thought it was interesting that another sort of third-party energy entity in the state, the New Hampshire Energy Summit. Um, this is the DuPont Group. They're a firm that does a lot of policy work on the energy side of things. They published a NH Energy Summit Policy Digest, where they highlight key regulatory proceedings to watch, and sort of totally independent of all the work that we're doing. They really called out this question of default service reform and procurement challenges and cost allocation. And they note that there's these series of overlapping PUC dockets looking at how electric default service should be procured, who should bear the financial risk. Um, and, they ask the questions of, well, the PUC is experimenting with requiring utilities to self-procure some percentage of their um, default supply, and they're shifting market and migration risk onto customers. This is a departure from the traditional twice yearly approach. Should this self-supply continue, expand, or be reduced? They raise the question of cost recovery and procurement overruns. Um, so, they're asking, there are other parties, other experts in this space other than CPCNH. They're asking a lot of the same questions.
Yeah, right. Well, congratulations on getting the 6-month reconciliation. That I think that's important for the whole market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did I understand you saying that there's a possibility that Eversource's rates may get changed during this 6-month period?
Yeah.
Jackson, can you speak to this? Do you?
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, my understanding, and I wish Dina was on, but my understanding is Eversource was ordered to come back and present a new rate, and that could go into effect as soon as the beginning of this, in February, and potentially later on. And we'll have to see, how the PUC handles that sort of refiling, but they're going to bring something to them in short order here. So I think it's very possible that we could see an upward adjustment. Like Henry mentioned, we want to tamper expectations. We don't think it's going to be huge, but every bit matters, and it does point to the fact that what's currently playing out in the marketplace is, maybe not ideal for customers because the messaging is hard and the price signals are, potentially distorted. So something we're obviously paying very close attention to, and if they do rule, we'll be sure to share that information very promptly with the membership. All right, looking for other items for discussion, questions, comments. One thing I like to remind folks of is, we're constantly looking at ways to improve our website. Thanks to a lot of great work by Nick Gosling, and have made lots of improvements across the specific member websites and other portions of our .gov website, which I'm so happy we have one instead of two now. That in of itself was a big victory. But if you haven't checked out your own community power website lately, please take a look at that and let us know what you think. There's certainly some room for customization or to make further refinements there. So.
I'll go again if it's okay.
Sure,
Another
go ahead.
our energy committee member asked, weren't we supposed to get regular reports of who's enrolled, who's opted up, and how we're doing with the program so far? One of the questions that came up are, for our Portsmouth customers, we went live, I think, in early in 23. So are our folks ahead or behind net? And it'd be interesting to know that.
Yeah. So you're referring to, I think, the opt action product election reports,
Yeah.
that show customer account information, community participation rates, actions, product elections, things of that nature. We do those get published on a monthly basis, and the one from December 1st is live on our website. So they're available through our what we call our documents library. And there's a section for community reports within that. And so we have a running list of all the opt action reports that are there. The one from January 1st is going to our member outreach and engagement committee to take a look at on Tuesday, and then we expect to publish that one online thereafter.
Okay, so if one of our energy committee people searches um, in your public documents,
Yep.
it should
I
be
just put a link in the chat to the
okay.
document library, and
Okay,
then you do have to navigate through sort of the embedded file system there, which we are working on in sort of improving naming conventions and such. But yeah, they're all in there.
right. And last question I have is, Kevin Schratz, who was on the board previously and uh, comes from a utility background, he managed the customer service part for one of the
Right.
utilities, and he was asking, why doesn't CPCNH notify customers directly the way the utilities are required to notify about rate changes, as opposed to doing it through a press release?
Yeah, I mean it's a good question. I think there were we first of all, we don't have emails for all of our customers. We have emails for many customers. We try not email folks with information unless they've elected to receive communications from us. So we've promoted our rate announcements as broadly as we can and are building up that subscriber list, which is, exceeded more than 1,000 people at this point. And that's one way that we're directly communicating about rates with customers. And then we obviously post information pretty broadly on our own website, on the DOE website, and work with our members to share out about it. Yeah, I mean, Henry, do you remember sort of the precedent as to why we don't send mass communications?
Yeah, our requirements on rate noticing are to the member communities and in terms of posting all information publicly availably on the website. And I think as Jackson discussed, we additionally have this subscriber list for anyone who would like to opt into receiving notifications. We've tried to make that as accessible as possible and are sharing it throughout communities. So we would encourage you all in your communities to point folks in that direction.
Yeah, we just did that as part of this press release, and we'll keep banging away on that in future press releases.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Appreciate that. Um, and then I see a comment from Paul. Yeah, so our cost allocation and benefit reports, or the CAB reports, have really detailed insight into all the various cost components from the cost sharing agreement and other member benefits. We update those on about a monthly basis. However, there's always a delay between the reported information and the present time. The reason for that is we have to allow for books to close and all of the various financial inputs to come into place for us to do the analysis and verification before we publish those reports. Paul's pointing out the last one is from September. That is true. We're actually in progress in having both October and November available within the coming week. So should expect to see something for those early next week, at least October.
I'll just say I do appreciate you guys taking the time and doing this.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Happy to do it. We definitely want to make space to be available for open forum like this. Um, the next office hours will be held in a couple weeks from now. That is going to be Friday the 23rd. And it will be focused on, legislative public engagement, and Dina will be sort of priming and prepping the membership for what to expect this legislative session. And there will be definitely opportunities for everyone to engage, and I would hope that some of you may take advantage of that, considering that's one of the great benefits to CPCNH. And in respect to that, you would have seen an action alert go out very recently, earlier this week, pertaining to a bill that we are helping to spearhead that's going to expand use cases for municipal revolving funds and more, allowing for more opportunities for energy innovation using those funds. And that's of particular interest to some of our programs that have accumulated discretionary reserves um, so far. So, but it has a lot of other good information included in there also.
Great.
I also see a comment from Paul about maybe make it a policy to report this quarterly to clarify expectations. Yeah, that's a good thought. We do like the sort of the monthly, how do I want to say this, resolution that folks can get, the month over month resolution within the reporting, and have developed some standard operating procedures for producing these reports. So we'll get back on a regular cadence there. And yeah, expect to have the ones that I mentioned available very soon. And I also see your thank you about continuing efforts to make the website more orderly and user friendly. So appreciate that. That is definitely something we've spent a lot of time on. And again, shout out to Nick for all of his work on that front. Any other questions or comments at this point? All right. Well, if not, thank you all. I thought that this was a good discussion, and appreciate all the thoughtful questions and comments that you did offer. And again, this is not by any means the only time you can get access to us. So continue to please reach out and lean on the staff at CPCNH to support you in your activities. We're here for you, and definitely available to attend any meetings that, it would be helpful for us to be there at. So let us know, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thanks for doing this.
Yep. Thanks a lot.
Happy New
All right.
Year.
Take care.
Yes.
Bye.